I'm Mary Beth.
Welcome to Turning Pages. As you know, we do our Owl Crate unboxing and we talk about books because we love to read because we're authors, and we always talk about, some aspect of the craft. So today we're going to talk about point of view, perspective of your story, and some of maybe like a general overview, and then maybe some of the ways or reasons why you might select first person or second person. Well, nobody would select second person, but what can you do in terms of tense and point of view? So go ahead, Mary Beth.
Okay, so a lot of recent YA books are written in first person, and you either love it or you hate it. I personally started, when I started writing Heavyweight, it was in third person, and I felt a real disconnect between my main character, and I was concerned that the reader was going to feel that same disconnect. So I went back and I rewrote the whole first chapter in first person present tense, and all of a sudden there was this, I was in his head and I was following the journey with him, which is exactly what I want the reader to experience. And sometimes you just have to play around with things like that, and maybe you don't rewrite a whole chapter. You take a couple of paragraphs and you see how it feels to you and whether you think it works. And don't worry about those people who aren't into it. You are writing what you feel is best for your story.
Well, one of the reasons why first person works in YA particularly, yes, it's a little bit limiting, but many of the stories deal with that kind of coming of age, figuring things out, major life events where the actual character's perspective is itself limited, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want to ramp up the intensity of the experience and you want to make that lens as narrow as possible, first person works really well for that because the reader actually goes on the journey with the character, right? And they don't know anything that the character doesn't know until the character knows it.
Right.
So it gives the audience that connectability, right? Mm-hmm. Another way to do that is to tell the story in present tense. So it is unfolding and it's unfolding as it's happening, right? And that can be really beneficial. Now, from a stylistic point of view, everyone likes to read what they like to read, but you have to know as a writer what's going to work for your story. Third person, particularly third person past tense, allows you to come out a little bit and have the character be a little bit more reflective. So these kinds of stories, maybe they're not your mysteries, your suspense, your thrillers. They're just the not run of the mill, because no story is run of the mill, but the other kinds of storylines that are kind of eluding me at this moment.
Your romances,
right.
Your contemporary, just living life kind of thing. Things that, it's not going to affect the story a whole lot if you know what's coming, because it seems typical, because it's,
right,
past tense.
And, one of the things that Mary Beth and I have talked about is a very popular series called the Divergent series, right? Where for the first
three books,
we were on board, okay? Yep. And when...
All Fortress. Not Fortress.
Two books. 4 movies. Yeah, 2 books.
Oh, that's right.
The third book, okay, Allegiance... because it's Divergent, Insurgent, and Allegiant. Right. Everybody was on board with Triss's perspective. We were ride or die with Triss. And then in the third book, spoiler alert, all of a sudden you get Four's perspective. And while Theo James, who plays Four on the screen, is very yummy and delightful to imagine talking to you, I felt, and I know Mary Beth agrees, that Veronica Roth did not do a solid enough job as distinguishing the two characters and their perspective. That is something that, as a writer, you have to be mindful of. Your character development really comes into play when you're doing a dual perspective, especially in a popular series where you've already had 2 full books of that character's perspective. So what happened for me, Mary Beth, and a lot of other readers is as you were reading it, you did not know who was talking, and you had to constantly keep checking.
It was a disconnect, and I didn't even finish it, to be honest, because I just had she started the books that way, maybe it wouldn't have been as big of an issue, but it was just so different from the first 2 that it led to a disconnect, and
and that's an important thing to remember, because you plot your story, you develop your characters. The one kind of shining moment as the author, the cherry on top of the sundae, if you will, is the perspective that you choose to tell the story in. And when you're writing it, like Mary Beth explained, you might go through a whole entire draft. I have done this whole entire draft in one tense and decide, ooh, you know what would make this better? Changing the tense. Yeah. And that's fine for draft phases, right? But once you've kind of gotten into it, you're kind of married to it.
Yeah.
There's an unwritten contract that you have with the reader that I'm not going to do anything to rock your world, right? So we just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about some of the different perspectives, and there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can do this. You've seen a lot in the contemporaries where they're bringing in text messaging, where they're bringing in emails, you know, whereas like in the classics, it's letter writing. Right? So the way that we communicate has changed, and we need our literature to reflect that as well. So that might lend itself to a present tense kind of a story, because
definitely
the internet is constantly moving. As we all know, it's alive. It's a beast.
Right. Or even, you know, if you have a story inside of a story. So if you've read Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, which sorry if I keep saying it wrong, you know, you have the story that she writes inside the story of her in college. So, you know, if that was written in just first person, you're not going to get all that kind of information, you know. Although I would have to go back and check, because I honestly don't remember. All right. I'll look into that.
There are many, one book that I finished, Scarlett Epstein Hates It Here, where she was actually writing a story. The character was writing a story in the story, was odd too, right? But once you kind of set those parameters, and then you can focus on how wide does that lens go, and how narrow do I want to make it. Even in a third person story, you're getting a character's perspective, because you still need the reader to connect to the character's experiences and feelings and thoughts. So when do you switch to another person? These are all stylistic things that, you know, your editors and your critique partners and your mom will probably help you with as you write. But it's always good to think about it. If you're stalled or stunted in a manuscript, take a look at it and decide, would it benefit from adding another character's perspective, or should I go with a first person? Or
you also have to think of it, you know, the genre that you're writing, because sometimes your location is a character in itself.
Yes.
So that's got to come through as well. And if you're writing that in first person, that's not really, you know, going to come through. So if it's first person high fantasy, which I don't know that I ever find, because those are normally huge parties, worlds, you know, and worlds and backgrounds and whatever. So, you know, you have to take that into account as well. Not just your, you know, your two main characters or your main character, whatever, but the setting and the importance that it plays in your story.
Absolutely. So we would love to hear from you. You know, and we always say this, if you're stuck and you know, should pick up a book in the genre that you're writing.
Definitely.
Find out what those authors are doing and use it as a guide, right? We don't have to recreate the wheel. There are only so many ways to do this thing.
Right.
Read in your genre that you're writing in and find out, you know, what's working. We'd love to hear from you. What do you prefer to read? What do you prefer to write in? First person, third person?
Do you hate first person?
I love it.
I like it too.
I love it.
I like to get in their
What are you
heads.
gonna do? I'm egotistical like that. I like it. I'm Bella Swan.
Oh, no, please don't be her.
Thanks for watching, guys, and until we see you again, keep turning those pages.
Bye-bye, literati.
Bye.